Join me for Unsolved Mysteries, this time on the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. Want to bring history to life in your classroom? With Everything is a Primary Source to Go, you can borrow real historical artifacts from the last 200 years, shipped right to your school. It's hands-on history, paired with ready-to-use lesson plans and classroom activities that make the past come to life for you and your students. Whether you're teaching the Industrial Revolution all the way up through the Communication Revolution, there's something in our collection for every era. Visit everything-history.com/EPS To Go and start transforming your teaching today. That's everything-history.com/EPS To Go, because history belongs in your hands. Welcome to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, the show where we navigate history through popular culture. I'm your host, Eric Salmonson. I'm a social studies teacher, historian, and pop culture enthusiast. Each episode, I sit down with everyday people to discuss the media, objects, places, and events that shape us and reveal what they say about the past, as well as who we are now. The Everything is a Primary Source podcast is, therefore, your history, my history, our history through popular culture. So glad to be joined today by Ali Russell here on the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. And I just recently went to one of your author appearances for your latest release. Among the titles that you have written is It Comes from the Trees, but your most recent one is Mystery James Digs Her Own Grave. And all of your books are geared towards a middle reader level, but honestly, these are stories that can appeal to a pretty wide audience. And if you don't mind, if you don't mind me making a parallel here, we're going to be talking about Unsolved Mysteries. Does that show have something to do with your title character?
Oh, no, actually, it does not. But I will say Unsolved Mysteries is a big influence on my writing. So maybe subconsciously, but like not, it doesn't immediately, I don't connect the two in my brain.
Where did she come from? Where did your character of Mystery James arrive from?
Mystery James arrived on the scene because I needed a character for the actual plot of the book. So the plot of the book came first. And for those who don't know, the plot of Mystery James Digs Her Own Grave is that Mystery was abandoned in a cemetery, raised in a funeral home, and she can smell ghosts. And then her aunt is accused of grave robbing. And so she's got to solve the mystery to kind of clear her aunt's name. So I came up with the plot first. It was based on a problem that I was having, and I think I talked about this at the book event where I would walk into into my bedroom, and I would smell something burning, and I would ask my husband, like, "Don't you smell that burning?" And he'd be like, "No, I don't smell that." And my very creepy brain one day said, "What if it's a ghost?" And so the plot came first, and then once I had the plot and the setting, I was like, "Okay, we are ready for the character." And Mystery just felt right. She just kind of, once I started typing out the story, she just kind of appeared and she felt like the right heroine for the story.
So when you were yourself the age that your stories are geared towards, were you just taking in all of the eerie, spooky, creepy, scary stories that you could?
Absolutely. I was watching Unsolved Mysteries. I was watching every single documentary in quotes that came out about cryptids. And at that time, I was really obsessed with UFOs and aliens. So I watched anything that had anything to do with Roswell. Fictional stuff too. Are You Afraid of the Dark? What's the other one? Goosebumps. There's one more that I'm forgetting. Are You Afraid of the Dark? Oh, I'm drawing a blank, but yeah, I watched everything.
Well, it seems like in that era of the late 80s, early 90s, there was just a smorgasbord of that kind of media. And so much of it was geared at that preteen, early teenager. I think it was Snick, who made Are You Afraid of the Dark? Nickelodeon that said, our shows like that one are made for kids who are too old to go to bed early, but too young to be out on dates or anything else, that they're just kind of at home. And I fit that exactly. I was that age when that show and shows like it were first coming on, where it was just like, yeah, it's not little kiddish. It's not too out of line for me. But it's just right. And so I feel like we all had growing up so many of these things influencing us, and it seems like that's what's channeling its way into your stories now.
I think so. And I think even, you just said kids who, how did you phrase it? Kids who were too old to go to bed and too young to be on dates. There's, middle grade is a spectrum. I write for ages 8 to 12, and there is a real gap on the tail end of that spectrum. So like kids who are, I would say like ages like 10 and up. So 10 to 12, 13-ish. Um, and you're right, that's the SNCC audience, but that's also the audience that I am writing for, because when I was that age, like from a reading perspective, there wasn't nearly as much children's fiction as there is now, especially horror. So I started reading things that I probably wasn't ready to read, things like Stephen King. So yeah, I think that like being part of that SNCC generation definitely influences like who I'm writing for and how I'm writing.
So many of those stories guided a path for people who are interested in horror of all of its forms. And we're going to be talking about Unsolved Mysteries, which I think each episode potentially had a door that would lead you down one of those paths. You
Hmm.
and I are similar in that I lived, at least at that time when the show was first on, for the UFO episodes. I was a UFO, I was really into them. I would intentionally scare myself with them. I had this book that I'm pretty sure I must have gotten because I used to like watching those episodes of Unsolved Mysteries that was all about UFOs and alien encounters and stuff. And there's this one page that reminded me of actually one of the scariest episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, where those guys in Maine claim to be abducted, and they're describing all of what they saw on board the alien spacecraft and all the experiments, and they give the drawings of them. This page in this book had like 4 or 5 different artist renditions of the grays, with the big eyes and the little mouths. And for some weird reason, I used to like at night before bed open that page and then immediately close it and like put it away. Like, I don't want to see that again. And it was like this weird obsession that I had. And then my dad had a copy of the book Communion,
Oh,
which has
yeah.
one of those drawings on the cover. Same thing. I would like look at it and just like throw it. I didn't want to. It's but it's that age that you're writing for, where it's like that's what you want them to react. They want to be scared because that kind of reaction, like I say to my son all the time, like I would be worried if you weren't frightened by this stuff, like if
Yeah,
you didn't show that emotion.
absolutely. I If I can chime in and tell you something too, I had a similar experience at that age. I had this book. I think it was called like Unexplained or Unsolved Mysteries. Um, and one of the mysteries that they were trying to solve in this book was spontaneous human combustion.
Mm.
So aliens were scary, Bigfoot was scary, but spontaneous human combustion was absolutely it for me. Like that was the thing that like kept me up at night. And I thought that if I thought about it too much, I would burst into flames. But the book, the book had a photo of someone who had allegedly, experienced spontaneous human combustion, and it was just a pair of legs, because the rest of them had like burned up.
Yep.
And I would open that book and I would look at that thing daily, even though I was terrified. So I think it's normal, like you said, for that age range, because we're testing our boundaries and trying to see like what's the limit for us.
way that this podcast works is that we take a piece of media. In this case, we're going to look at two versions of Unsolved Mysteries and compare and contrast them and see what they tell us about time and place. So, how are they reflections of or products of a certain time period? What can we tell about the past? And in this case, not the terribly ancient past. This is fairly recent stuff. But if we were to take a look at unsolved mysteries that started to show up around 1987 and took shape in 1988 with its most recognizable host, Robert Stack, and then move ahead to the 2019 2020 version, which Netflix made, understanding that the show never really actually left the airwaves. It went from uh, NBC, CBS, I think, Lifetime. It bounced around. Even Spike TV, the ultimate early 2000s channel, had Unsolved Mysteries for a little while. And in true early 2000s cheap cable fashion, they just recycled the old episodes and had Dennis Farina host it. So it's never really gone away, but we're going to compare the two bookends, the original and the more recent ones. So the question is for both, and this is how we do it. We take, as you would an item in a museum, let's say, a number of questions and then see what the answers to those questions will tell us. So the first question is, what's the material and how is it made? My understanding for the original Unsolved Mysteries, considering the time period that it was just paper, right? Newspapers. They would scour the country. They would ask people to send in their news clips. And honestly, this isn't terribly far away from when people started to do that with their VHS tapes, sending into ABC so that Bob Saget could make fun of them on America's Funniest Home Videos. So, what do you take from that? I mean, when you watch those episodes, knowing that it's almost like the senior citizen with their police scanner on, right? Like, oh, that sounds interesting. I mean, what does that tell us about the society at the time that we were so reliant on just kind of like the people producing their own show in a way?
Um, I think it I think it speaks to a different way of life where there was a lot more community back then. I feel, and I don't mean to like frown at technology or anything. Like obviously, like we all use technology and it's great. We all have social media accounts, and I think to some degree we think we're more connected. But I would actually argue that that's not necessarily true. Like you still miss that like human element. And I think that, at that point in time, if people are compiling stories, just from like newspapers and VHS tapes and even word of mouth, like you think about younger, oh, well, millennials, I'll stick to that generation. But the way that like we could spread a rumor or a legend or an urban legend, by word of mouth, you could get it from New York to California without the internet is just amazing. And I would love to see like a study about that. And so I think that it speaks a little more to how community was formed back then. Like they didn't have like the vast amounts of tech that we have at our fingertips. And so they had to like, a Robert Stack starts each show with like, I think he said like, join me, perhaps you can help solve a mystery. And then they would invite you to like send in your story. They had the call center with Keely Shea Smith. So it really was like an invitation to be part of a community that didn't exist online. It was just, water cooler and word of mouth kind of situation. So I think it speaks to how different community was back then.
I've been saying this for a while because we watch reruns of Unsolved Mysteries, the Robert Stack ones, and for some reason we're very seasonal with our TV watching. Like for most of the school year, because my wife and I are both teachers, for most of the school year we wake up in the morning with Frasier episodes, and that leads us until right around spring break. And then we come back from spring break as things get warmer. Not that it makes any sense at all, but that's when the unsolved mysteries start coming on in the morning as we get ready for the day. And then into the early summer, you can hear the music playing in, first thing in the morning. And for some reason, it's like kind of cozy and comforting. And as I watch these old episodes, I come to that same conclusion that you just did. It's a very similar idea. And I'm so glad that you put it into those words of community that in many ways, and I've been trying to articulate this the right way, but in some ways represents sort of like an apex of our society working together and having each other's backs, really looking out for one another. So many times on that program, when you see uh, criminals that they're looking for get apprehended, it's like the neighbor was watching the show and they didn't think twice about it. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I feel confident enough to say, yeah, that guy at the gas station, that's the one you're looking for. But
Um,
plenty of people did because they felt that that was for the greater good of everybody. That if they, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the guy that they're looking for that killed those two people in Michigan. I'm gonna call Unsolved Mysteries.
I agree with you. I cannot remember somebody's face 2 seconds after I've seen them, so I would not be comfortable in this day and age. And I don't know if that like speaks to like our attention spans too because of technology. Like it's harder for me to read a book. It's harder for me to like sit and not pick up my phone. So I don't know if it's like a tech and attention span thing. But a funny thing for you to know, I watched a documentary about unsolved mysteries probably like 3 or 4 months ago. And I don't know if you know anything about the production value of the OG Unsolved Mysteries, but
Film.
it was like film. It was like movie quality stuff. Like they had sets and everything. And one of the things that I took away from that documentary that I thought was kind of hysterical is that they had actors and they would like, they had local people from around town. And so people started to call when they saw the actors. Oh,
Yeah.
I saw. And so after a while, Unsolved Mysteries had to give the actual actors cards that said I was, a star on Unsolved Mysteries. I did this episode or whatever. But like, yeah, I totally agree with you. I don't think I would be comfortable enough. And I think too, I I don't know again if this is a generational thing. Like I don't answer my doorbell if I can't see who it is on the ring cam. I don't answer phone calls. I don't know. I'm very much all about like my own business and not in anybody else's business. And I don't know
Mhm.
if that's like really a good thing, but it's just I think how a lot of people in the generation are.
It does represent sort of the last bastion of that uniculture that we were all part of. Comedian Sebastian Maniscalco has a great bit about when the doorbell rings in that era versus now. And I love the part where he says, um, the kids slide up in their socks. It's just like they just open the
Yeah.
door. You don't care who it is. Hey, oh, look who it is. And the kids are just like slide up on their socks. Company's here, right? That fits in with Unsolved Mysteries, the original Unsolved Mysteries. It was a community effort. But going back to what you're saying about the actors, I mean, forget Nielsen ratings. If you need to provide your actors with cards saying that they're not actually these terrible people they're looking for, that says something about how popular your show is, that everybody's watching it. And yeah, I saw that same documentary. I loved it because it gave me that same kind of almost like the same feeling I got when I watched the show, totally unpretentious,
Hmm.
right? I never got the feeling from the original one that they were thinking of themselves more than they were. There's a bit of humility throughout it. And even the documentary, it's just very straightforward. Like, here's the people involved in it. Here's a bunch of stories. This is how we made episodes. There it is. That's all you need to know. And in its simplicity, it accomplished so many things. I loved how each episode, and this would be a great way to transition to the newer one, each episode had several stories to it, and they would introduce it the same way that a news broadcast might. They even had to say in the reruns, this is not a news broadcast because they would frame it tonight on Unsolved Mysteries, and they go through what they're going to be. They would use the same music, same font, same images for a UFO, for ghosts, for murderers, for bank robbers, for family reunions, right? They would have like that urgent music, do 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 do, and then it's like you see a bunch of people that hadn't seen each other in 30 years, like finding each other once again. But the newer one has the music, or at least a version of it, even provides a ghostly image of Robert Stack in the intro, which is a nice nod. But they only tackle one mystery per episode. Why do you think they changed that?
I'm a fan. I should say that I'm a fan of the one story per episode. I think that it introduces a little more drama, a little more emotion into each story, because you have the time. Like if you watch the OG Unsolved Mysteries, each story gets like 2 to 5 minutes, which doesn't seem like very much time. But with the newer one, you're getting, I think, are the episodes an hour or 40 minutes, somewhere in between
Somewhere
there.
between there, yeah.
So yeah, you're getting a good chunk of time dedicated to the family, how they were impacted, more details on like the actual case. You're talking to the detectives who are trying to solve it. So I think that I am a fan of that model. And one of the things, it's hard to like talk. It's hard to talk about unsolved mysteries without talking about tech and like our current state. And I think about this a lot. Like when there is something significant that happens, like in terms of like media, like a movie, like I always think of the Fear Street trilogy that was released several years ago, and how that was a moment, right? They released one every Friday, and people hopped online to chat about it. It's
Mhm.
harder to do that if you have a show that has 6, 7, 8 stories. So I think that the choice to focus on one was, and maybe they didn't realize they were doing this, like maybe it was an attempt to appeal to this like very digital online generation, where if you have episode 7 and it's got 8 different stories in it, it's harder to like discuss something like that online because people are jumping around. Whereas if you just do one story, then
Yeah.
people will do like a deep dive, and like people always want more of, whatever the story is. So like you can do like a whole podcast episode, you can do a deep dive on a Reddit thread. And so one story format lends itself better to, I think, how people consume stories in
That's
this
a
current
good
age.
That's an excellent point, and one I hadn't considered because when I watched the newer one, I was all excited because I'm like, Unsolved Mysteries is back. You know, sorry, all these other documentaries, the real tellers of true crime are here and I remember watching that. I'm like, this doesn't look all that different from all these other documentaries that are out there nowadays. But then I remembered, I'm like, well, Unsolved Mysteries started it all. They're the ones who gave us really the interactive home sleuth, I can help solve this mystery too. And what has evolved separate from the all titles of Unsolved Mysteries is this true crime fascination, UFO fascination, ghost hunting, all these different things. So it's almost like it's finding its way back, but because the culture around it has changed so much in the way that we don't have appointment TV anymore. You know, Unsolved Mysteries, I think for the longest time was on Friday and then they moved to Saturday, but you always knew when it was on and usually 8 o'clock. But then this new one, it could be on anytime you want. And like you said, I mean, imagine how confusing that would be and how you wouldn't go anywhere. You would dead end it if you were like, here's 8 things and everybody's talking about it. Are we going to make chat rooms for each one? No, it's just too much trouble. So yeah, I like the way that, because off the air we said part of this is you bringing me to the new one and liking it and maybe giving it a better chance than I did originally. But this also might go into the next question, that is, who's the intended audience? The original one was pretty wide open. It was, I would say, it would be a strong PG, parental guidance. I'm not sure if our parents were always there guiding us, but I know that they tiptoed around, like that famous one where they found like the arson tape and the guy is talking into the, I did this.
Yeah.
This is, that would shock and disturb a kid easily. Um, and just the knowledge that most of these things, especially the true crime stuff, are true and terrible. But do you think that that was a purposeful thing in that era that they were like, yeah, let's go for a pretty wide audience?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we were talking about community, and I think the easiest way to build community is to make everybody feel included. And so, if you have something that is a little bit spooky, a little bit mystery, a little bit news, a little bit, strange, a little bit thriller, and it has like all of these different elements, and there's something for everyone. Like, even, if mom is interested in like the thriller aspect and dad's interested in, um, maybe the spooky story, like people can get up and leave and come and go and still be part of the episode. So yeah, I think absolutely like that was intentional. And I think it worked. And I do think, you were talking about how Unsolved Mysteries, the show and the documentary, like didn't feel pretentious at all. And I almost get the sense that they were constantly and consistently shocked by their own success. But because they did this so well, like and a lot of that I think is because of Robert Stack. Like he was the glue, he was the thing that held everyone together. I think he was hosting at a time, when celebrities, were a little bit more revered than maybe they are today. Like, we didn't know as much about what went on behind the scenes with celebrities, because we didn't have the internet. So I think, he was the glue that like held everything together and made everybody feel welcome and invited to be part of it. So yeah, I think that was absolutely intentional.
I was always a bit intimidated by him, but I also felt like he was the good guy, the serious good guy, that he was there to let us know somebody's on top of this, right? That
Yeah.
that person that's, terrorizing all the rest stops, don't worry. People that look like me are on this case. We're all wearing the trench coats. And um it's you make that point about the internet, and that kind of like quietly shows up, but we have to remind ourselves the show started in earnest in 1988 after a few test runs as something else, and then they made Unsolved Mysteries the show in 1988. It's not long before the internet is popularized and people are using that, and you can tell a distinct difference. Like I said, we have that show on pretty much all morning long. We go right through the seasons, all through June, and by the time you get to like the 1997, 1998, as it's rounding the bend to the end of its run, it's kind of the same show, but it's not. You can tell the difference that they're it almost like they're trying to go for shock value in the later seasons of the first run, where they are getting more violent with their topics. Even their reenactments are a little bit more shocking than the original ones. I think we all probably have our favorite hokey moments from the earlier seasons. One of my favorites is the one where there's a young lady who's been she keeps trying to run away from a cult that she's in. And Holmes Osborne, the dad from Bring It On and That Thing You Do, he's a dad in like everything. He's an election as a dad. That actor plays like the assistant cult leader guy, and they break into the house that she's staying at. And he's actually a pretty good actor, but in this part, they're like, "Who are you, man?" He's like, the police." Like, and it's just like that. And we're like, "Oh, isn't that? Yeah, that's that guy." Um, that hokiness could fly before the internet, but that post internet arriving into our lives, there'd be somebody doing something with that afterwards. And I feel like the internet changed that original program, whereas the new one was born well into the internet age and social media age and so forth.
hmm Um, to your point about, celebrities being on the show, like, can you imagine the episode with Matthew McConaughey if that if that had been like released today? Yeah, it doesn't work. Um, I think I think that some of that change probably has to also do with just the massive explosion in TV channels, the internet, and all of these other things that are vying for like people's attention now. Um, in the 80s, like was cable around in the 80s? Was cable around yet? Or was that like, because
Yeah,
I didn't,
it was pretty popular, but it still, even those who had it, it was only like 50 channels. It wasn't
right.
nearly and
Well,
half of
and
those
you
didn't even
think,
work.
well, yeah, and you think, when by the time I was like 10, I think that's about the time when we got cable. Um, we were up into the hundreds. I remember channels that went all the way up to like 150, 123. So I feel like the show was probably doing what it felt it needed to do to stay relevant, kind of stay on top, and grab people's attention in a time where there was just always more developing, like newer channels. uh, thriller shows or mystery shows that were a little darker. And so Unsolved Mysteries did what they needed to do to stay popular.
As a fellow educator, I know that taking our social studies classes to historical sites and museums can be a rewarding experience for everyone involved. But between coordinating transportation, keeping track of permission slips, and paying out of pocket for unforeseen expenses, it can also be a large task for a busy teacher. The Everything is a Primary Source to Go artifact borrowing service replicates the most engaging part of a museum field trip. And that's interacting with real historic objects directly in your classroom, but without the process and cost of taking your class off campus. The Everything is a Primary Source archive contains ephemera and physical objects dating from the 1820s onward, with emphasis on the 20th century. Pre-made and curated kits pull from the collection and are designed to complement your curriculum, just as the exhibits at your favorite cultural center do. Visit everything-history.com to learn more about EPS To Go and how it can help you bring the museum to your classroom. Therefore, that I would say that early season, I'll stick with that idea of it being an apex of sorts. And then, I mean, we went to my family and I went to a 90s con a couple years ago. I've mentioned that a few times on the podcast, including the podcast I did just before we went to it and then when we got back from it. And one of the things we recognized over there is that they didn't cover the darker side of the 90s. It was all Nickelodeon, Disney Channel. Like if you were 11 for the duration of the 90s, that's what this 90s con was predominantly. There was a very little of the more darker, older side of that decade. And you're absolutely right that every year it seemed like the notches just kept going up and up and up. And there was just more and more that kind of a quaint show like Unsolved Mysteries just wouldn't be able to hold up. Do you feel like the new one, therefore, obviously by having the same font, by using the theme music, by that nod to Robert Stack we mentioned before, is saying, all right, audience of the original one, come on over, but also maybe trying to appeal to people that came of age in the 21st century and it maybe didn't even know about the original one.
Yeah, I think it is trying to appeal to both. One thing I want to say is that, and maybe this will help sway you on the new Unsolved Mysteries, is I do think it's harder to it's probably harder to produce an Unsolved Mysteries episode these days. We live in a state with like a lot of tech. We live in a surveillance state. Everything that we do is monitored online. You go to the grocery store, you swipe your card, like you leave a digital trail everywhere that you go. And it almost sometimes feels like there are no more mysteries left in the world because like we can see everything. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's still why people gravitate toward like missing persons cases in particular, because it's like, well, where did they go? We've got street cameras on, or we got cameras on every street corner. Like, where did they go? So I would like to like acknowledge that about like the new Unsolved Mysteries. And I think that is um a part of why they focus on like a single story to like really do a deep dive and like show that they have like dotted all their I's, crossed all their T's in terms of investigating. Because with younger generations who are very much online and they're in Reddit threads and they're listening to podcasts and they are doing research and like digging through internet archives and whatnot. They are going to want a lot of those questions answered. And so really can't do that in like 3 to 5 minutes. And so, yeah, I think that like a lot of how the current Unsolved Mysteries episodes play out is to cater to a new, younger generation that is going to have all these questions that you need to answer. And you want to keep them engaged. But also, for people like us, I don't even know how many people, I'm so impressed that you noticed the ghost of Robert Stack and the imagery, because I don't know how many people pay attention to it or notice it. And I noticed it. So I think, yeah, I think it's a good attempt at trying to appeal to two different age demographics. And, but for the host part, I'm glad that I would love a host. I think the show is missing that. They can't possibly have a host right now because no one would measure up to Robert Stack in our minds. And, I was talking about celebrities. I just don't think celebrities hold as much sway as somebody like Robert Stack did in the 80s or 90s. So I almost feel like it would have been bad for them on if they had like introduced a host because that's all they would have never heard the end of it. Oh, this host is terrible. They don't have like the gravitas that Robert Stack had
Yeah.
or this. No, I think yeah, like they did the best that they could for two completely different audiences.
You mentioned two sides of the same coin, really. On the one hand, it's great that we have such an age where I don't know if it's a great thing, but it does happen. You can't stop it that people become online sleuths. They take it upon themselves to, in the spirit of the original one, like I'm going to help solve this mystery, and I can do quite a bit just with my laptop, honestly. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is it causes for media makers, creators to hesitate and they don't want to because they know if they make the wrong choice. I mean, look what happened with the second Star Wars sequel, right? If you make the wrong choice, the internet will come down on you and just make you miserable. And so, yeah, if they said, "Yep, Tom Selleck, he's going to be our host of Unsolved Mysteries," he was Magnum PI and he's a cop on some cop show. Let's make him the new Robert Stack. Actually, I think it's a pretty good idea, but they can't do it now, like you said, because even if they had from the start, everybody would be like, not Tom Selleck, no. How about this guy? And everybody would toss up their own
I
person.
I I would have said not Tom Selleck, definitely Lance Reddick because I don't think anybody is more perfect than Lance Reddick. So like everybody is going to want their to feel listened to, um, and I think it's impossible to do that in this day and age because
It should
everybody.
have been actually Virginia Madsen because she was on the original and they brought her in to get um, people interested again, from
Oh,
Candyman. And then she,
oh, oh,
remember they would go to her remotely. And that's when it got kind of confusing was towards the end. I'm like, is this a new show? Because they're like, we'll go back to Kaylee Ann Smith in the studio and like the call center. I always thought it was like a fake call center, but legitimately it was real. They were taking it taking the calls on the air and stuff. And apparently it was a buzzing hive of activity. It had a lot going on for it. And I really appreciate the show as almost like a public service that they continue to do updates, that the website is still maintained and even the when they replay the episodes on Amazon Prime or on Peacock, wherever you get them now, the old episodes, they still will update them. And then there's a string of all sorts of online communities, Reddits, Facebook fan groups, things like that, where people will submit new updates. So it planted seeds for a lot of this. And I suppose, I guess the new one is just kind of like there's the latest section of that garden of, it's not trying to say, unless I'm wrong, it's not trying to say we are the end all. We're just part of this great maze of, kind of like in The Shining or something like the hedge maze of mystery solving programs, and we're not the ones, we're not the kings from the 80s, I guess, if that's the most inarticulate way of putting it.
no, I agree with you absolutely, and I think that because they have done quite a lot of like emphasis and focus on the older stories too. Like I know that Unsolved Mysteries has a podcast,
Mm.
and they focus on some new, some older stories. They do still provide updates, I believe, through the podcast because I feel like I've seen a couple come through. So yeah, I feel like they are doing their best to just say like we are continuing the legacy and not trying to like create a new legacy.
And a chilling podcast at that we were like, we go, like a lot of Americans, we go to bed with podcasts on plenty of times. For a while we were listening to Unsolved Mysteries podcast. I would wake up in the middle of the night like, what did I just hear? Like, what, it got into my dreams and like horrible stories. I'm like, oh my God. but I mean, it does work for the audio medium fine. You don't have the reenactments. I mean, there would be like sound effects and a little bit of reenactment type stuff, but nothing compared to the original program. But it's like the same title of the show, but it's such a different feel to it nowadays. We could really trace modern history through Unsolved Mysteries, it turns out.
We could. I will say, you just got me thinking about this. I don't think, as much as I really like the new Unsolved Mysteries, I don't think it will ever have quite the fan base that the OG show has. Um, for one of the reasons that you mentioned, how you said, "Oh, what is this? It looks just like every other, murder mystery documentary that Netflix does." That I guess it feels like, the same as everything else. So like, I don't think it's going to have that kind of same fan base. And then also just because like the availability of it, like one of the things too, back in the 90s, you watched whatever came on TV. On demand wasn't necessarily a thing, I think, until like the latter part of the 90s. And so you kind of watched it, you caught it when you watched it. I felt like the same thing used to happen with Goosebumps episodes. Like I would be so upset when I woke up on Saturday mornings and realized I missed Goosebumps.
Oh, yeah.
And so like the same thing for Unsolved Mysteries. And now it's almost like McDonald's breakfast 24/7. It's like not a
Yeah.
good thing. And like it's not as good when you can like get it all the time. And I feel that way about like the Unsolved Mysteries, like the fact that it streams and like you can just watch it whenever. There's so much competition. I think Netflix knows that they are never going to like hit those same numbers probably as the OG Unsolved Mysteries. And Netflix has a history of canceling things too. So I'm worried that the new Unsolved Mysteries is canceled. But yeah, I just think it's never going to, the new version anyway, as good as I think it is, it's never going to like hit that same pop culture moment that
Yeah.
the OG show.
And it's just to the pure, just there's a surplus of options, just too much in some cases. And the last thought about the new one is I did a little bit of looking into it. And I guess one of the creators of Stranger Things was the producer of the one of the producers of New Unsolved Mysteries. And I'm curious if there's um an intentional relationship there. I mean, Stranger Things is just kind of like, hey, let's take the bulk of the 80s, everything sci-fi horror, anything like that, mash it all together, and that's what you get. I remember the first episode of Stranger Things, I was just my mouth was open during just the intro with the red neon and the synthwave music. I'm like, this is so brilliant. And like without ever coming out directly and saying this is a reference to Goonies, like they would like put in, now ET time. It's like no, they would just kind of like it was there. And so I'm curious if that was the reason or the rationale behind, kind of because look on, the if I'm following Stranger Things timeline, I mean, at this point, those kids are like 30, so maybe they'll have to jump ahead to 1998. But it seems like they're what, 85, 86,
About
85, right? Is like around the time. So therefore, Unsolved Mysteries would be coming out towards the end of Stranger Things. I mean, I can't think of a better collection of, I mean, they could make an entire season of just all the weird stuff in Stranger Things. So, I mean, wouldn't that be the coolest thing if somebody did like a fictional Unsolved Mysteries with, this Indiana town is, strange things happen. And like, that would just be like the coolest AI. Let's get AI on it and have Robert Stack's voice come back. Favorite episode or favorite segment of the original one?
Oh, um, I should know this because I in prepping for this episode, I took a look at my blog post that I wrote about all the episodes I watched. I will say, I don't remember what the episode number was, but there was a ghost story. And I think it's just my favorite because I have like fond memories of it because my parents had gone out for the night. We had a babysitter, and I was like huddled up on the couch, like watching Unsolved Mysteries, knowing that it was too scary for me and I was going to cares? But it was a ghost story, and I think it took place in like a cabin or on a ranch of some sort. And these people who were living in the cabin, they kept hearing and seeing like a ghostly presence. And I just remember the sound of the ghost like cowboy boots like walking down the hallway. So I think that was probably one of my favorites. And then like every single UFO one that they had.
Yes. That, and I mean, throw in a delivery pizza into your story, and it's like the coziest image that you just created in my head of like early 90s. Oh, it's so great. I think like we started out by talking, I have to say for myself, I've gone through eras being that I still watch this show that's 30 years old. But when I was a kid, it was all the UFOs. Like I would get actually annoyed if they didn't have a segment when they would start the show, and I'm like, oh man, it's just a bunch of murders and like, I mean, that's sad, but like, I want to see UFOs. I love the UFO ones. I think one of my favorites, the one I was talking about before, that was too scary. I didn't like that, but I did like, I think it was one where it was like a triangle in the sky that is in upstate New York, and as people videoed it, took it. I suppose, side note, it might be why the newer one has a little bit of trouble. Like you were saying before, everybody, I mean, all that stuff in New Jersey last year, that's like perfect fodder for Unsolved Mysteries. But you know how many people are like filming it with like 4K, great high definition cameras? Like there's nothing mysterious about it. The only thing mysterious is like ultimately what exactly was that? We had this fog of like not everybody had a camcorder back then. So it was always kind of chilling when you had that grainy, it's all black, but a few lights in the distance, or like kind of like, and you hear the voice, like, I don't know what that is. Oh man, where'd it go? And like that kind of stuff. Love it. Anytime Unsolved Mysteries had that, I was in my happiest place until I opened that book to that weird page. So Allie, thank you so much for joining me this evening. If people would like to learn more about you and your work, what's the best place for them to go?
You can find me at One Dark Alley, Alley spelled ALLY. But I also have a website. It's, what is my website? AllieRussellBooks.com. My contact form is down right now, but if you go to the website, you can still send me emails.
Well, I hope that if you do run into Allie or read any of her books, you'll feel the late 80s, early 90s, the power of all of this wonderful media that was scaring us, chilling us, making us feel like, I don't know why I can't change this channel, but you'll feel that as you read these stories. And I thank you so much for joining the Everything is a Primary Source podcast tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything, including Unsolved Mysteries, all versions of that show are primary sources. We'll talk to you next time. Popular culture, by definition, connects and unites us and proves that people of different backgrounds, in fact, have a lot in common with one another. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, at least in part, for that reason. If it connects with you and you'd like to add to it, or any of the podcast episodes, just visit everything-history.com and search for the Everything is a Primary Source project, which can be found in the classroom section of the website. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Be sure to rate and share this podcast wherever you are listening to it now, and follow Everything is a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.